Hello, everybody, and welcome to Après, Midi with Alec Lobrano, and welcome back for La Rentrée. And as you can tell, we're still passing drinks around and all of that. I met Alec Lobrano, a few years ago.
A little while.
Yeah, a little while ago.
Back.
I'm going to tell you a funny story that Alec doesn't know. I used to write a restaurant guide. In fact, I wrote the first online restaurant guide to Paris in 1996. He probably doesn't have a clue anything about it.
I knew you did that. Yeah.
You knew I did that?
I did.
Okay. And I was working with an agent, with a literary agent, to get it published. And she said, you know, I'm really sorry, but we've decided instead to publish Alec Lobrano's book.
Sorry.
True story, it's a true story. I knew when I knew, okay? It was, you know, I was up against him, okay? So forget it. It wasn't going to happen. It was okay. Since it was him, it was all right.
Sorry. Start a blog.
You, and I did. Okay. No, you deserved it, totally. Okay, anyway, My Place at the Table, a recipe for delicious life in Paris. He has only 5 or 6 books?
6 books.
6 books.
But you can buy it it's on Amazon at Kindle. And I think W.H. Smith still has copies too.
Okay. But they're with him and he's going to sign the copies. And they're only 20 euros. So don't let him leave with any. Okay, you got to get your hand up there and say, I'm taking one now. He grew up in Connecticut and lived in Boston, New York, and London before moving to Paris in 1986, his home today, and you beat me by about 8 years. He was European correspondent for Gourmet magazine from 1999 until it closed in 2009. Has written about food and travel for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Guardian, Bon Appetit, Food and Wine, Saveur, Travel and Leisure, Condé Nast Traveler, and many other publications in the US and the UK. He's the author of Hungry for Paris. That's probably the one you guys mostly know, right? Right? And The Ultimate Guide to the City's 110 Best Restaurants, and a contributing editor at Saveur magazine. His second book, Hungry for My Place at the Table, a recipe for a delicious life in Paris.
That's
right?
Third
right?
Book. The second book was Hungry for France. But
You're right. I just missed.
So
you're right.
okay.
Thank you. His second book, Hungry for France, was published by Rizzoli in April of 2014, and his most recent book, My Place at the Table, a recipe for a delicious life in Paris, was published in 2021. He's won several James Beard Awards, and in 2011, he was awarded the IACP's Bert Green Award for Culinary Writing for his article, Spirit of the Bistro, in Saveur magazine. And very recently, I don't know if you guys saw the article in the Wall Street Journal, right? About Nice.
Exactly, yeah.
Which was fantastic, and I took a lot of his recommendations. So on that note,
All right.
Alec Lobrano.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for coming this afternoon. And this feels sort of like a back-to-school event for me. I got up very early this morning because I now divide my time between
Can you speak a little louder? We can't hear you.
I'll do what I can. I'll do my best, but I'll get hoarse if I go too loud. And now I've lost my train of thought.
I divide my time between
Thank you
meetings.
very much. The alarm clock went off at 5 a.m. this morning.
This crowd will keep you in good shape, I can tell you right now, okay?
My throat? Okay. But in the train on the way up here today, I'm normally not too chatty in trains because I love to read and I'm busy, and train time for me is, I love France so deeply that I could stare out the window at France going by just for hours. And at this time of the year, the country I think is especially beautiful. And so I was staring out the window very happily when the woman sitting next to me, who I had barely noticed, asked me a question in French about something. oh, she said they're no longer little litter bins at the seats anymore. And I thought, gosh, there haven't been for a long time. And I said, no, but there's somebody who goes back and forth, goes up and down the aisles to collect the rubbish. So if you have something, he should be along in a while. Don't worry. And then I went back to staring out the window, and then she asked me another question. And she said, do you live in Paris? And I said, I go back and forth between Paris and the south. And what about you? And she said, I'm going to Paris for a funeral. So I thought, okay, I will make an exception. Because clearly she needed to talk. This was a heavy trip for her. When you see that somebody really needs some company, you offer it to them. I can stare out the window at France in the other direction. And we started talking, and she asked me, what do you do? And she said to me, are you Swiss? Are you Belgian? You have a little accent. And I said, no, as a matter of fact, I'm from La Nouvelle-Angleterre. She said, you're American? And I said, I am. It happens. It wasn't my fault. And I told her what I did, and she said, goodness grief, what a life you've made for yourself here. How did it happen? And I thought, gosh, I wish my father was standing next to us, because the last time I ever saw him was for his, I spent a week with him in Florida, and we were walking on the beach one day, and he wasn't a very emotive person. And at one point he said to me, can I ask you a question? And I said, sure. I'm the eldest of 4, by the way. I have 2 brothers and a sister. And he said, I just don't understand it. I think you're a wonderful writer, and you went to Amherst College, which is a brilliant college, and everything is great, but why food? And he really like a furrowed brow, as though it was a perversion. And I said, well, Dad, actually, I've been interested in food ever since, I started minting memories, because I have a bipolar gastronomic background. My mother was from Boston, and my father's family had been in New Orleans for a very, very long time.
Oh, that'll do it to you.
Yeah.
There you go. So guess which city gave me my interest in food? With all due respect to any Bostonians in the room, one eats really well in Boston today,
But not like in New Orleans.
well, also not like what it was when my mother would drop me and my sister off at my grandmother's in Back Bay. A lady in rustling or black organda and mourning jewelry, who had a cook from Nova Scotia. And when my brothers and my sister and I talked about those meals with my grandmother, we called them the white meals, because we would have on a white plate cauliflower, rice, and codfish, period. I mean, nothing. And there was the famous day it was May, I think, and I was looking out the window, and the radiator's hissing, and the windows are very, very carefully closed, even though you could see lilac tumbling, leaning over in the garden at back. And I was 13, and I said to my grandmother, looking at the white meal, which it might have been chicken and potatoes and God knows what, could we please have some mustard or some ketchup or some Tabasco sauce or something? And without looking up, she said, first of all, children do not speak until they're spoken to, which you well know. And second of all, children do not eat condiments because condiments excite them. So every once in a while when I go home, when I was back in the U.S. during the summer, and we had a barbecue on Nantucket, and my brothers and my sister, everybody was there, and I saw my sister with a ketchup bottle, and I said, whoa, girl, don't get crazy. But that was the one side of things. The other side of things was that my grandfather left New Orleans paternal grandfather left New Orleans to study at Cornell. where his roommate was E.B. White. And after they finished at Cornell and they moved to New York, my grandfather, of course, was not going back to New Orleans because he was a man of words, and he wanted to work in publishing in New York. So he ended up as the editor of Town and Country until E.B. White called and said, it's a little dodgy, but we're starting a new magazine. It's called The New Yorker, and I think you'd probably be happier here than writing about stuff for socialites in Westchester. So my grandfather went to New York. I went to work at The New Yorker, where he was fiction editor for many years. His family, and Adrian knows about this, New Orleanian people want to keep their own. So the fact that they had lost one to the north, and he'd married a woman from upstate New York, didn't sit well. So my brother and I were put on the train in New York every summer to go down and visit the two great aunts who lived in that family house in the French Quarter.
Well, you see, it's inconceivable why anyone would want to leave New Orleans.
I love New Orleans. I think
I
New
mean,
Orleans
that's
is
it.
fabulous. I mean, it's one of my favorite places in the world. But down there, they were like two little porcelain dolls, these ladies, and they spoke French to each other. And, you know, there we were, my brother and I. It was hot. They only had ceiling fans. And they had a cook who was, I have to be careful about talking about people who have large bellies these days, I'm afraid. But let's say twice my size, big as a barrel, Emma. And one day I kind of like peered into the kitchen to see what she was doing, and she said, "You little white rat, if you're gonna look into my kitchen, you're gonna come in here and work with me." So my brother and I went into the kitchen. She took us to the market. She showed us how to cook beautiful, beautiful, beautiful food. Cajun food, Creole food, and French food, and what she would occasionally disdainfully call American food, which only happened when my great aunts had people over for cards. But the magic in that kitchen, and the food was so good. And so that was sort of the spore of that. And also people from New Orleans are real storytellers. I mean, the pleasure of the table is what's in your plate, but it's also always who else is seated there. And the repartee, and the sharing, and the storytelling, and the humor, and everything else that's going on. So the pleasures of the table I learned in New Orleans, God knows not in Boston. And my late mother, much to her credit, as a busy suburban mother of four, who happened to be the head of the NAACP in Connecticut. She was a ferociously liberal woman, and so she was busy. Between that and between organizing a program of pairing families in Westport, Connecticut to diplomat families at the UN in the hopes of creating world peace or whatever it was. I mean, Mom had so many pots boiling at any moment. And yet, much to her credit, she would occasionally say when we were on school vacation, you know, find a recipe for something Vietnamese. And she'd say, get in the car, we have to find lemongrass. I think it's going to be a lot of driving, but I'm sure we can track it down. And she said, through her, she said, you know, when you eat in other countries' food, it's like traveling. You'll travel one day, but in the meantime, it's a way of traveling before you get there. Because their taste constellations are different from ours, and their flavors tell a story. And cooking is the history of every country. And so, you know, she was extremely imaginative in the kitchen, and to the despair of my poor father, who'd get home from his horrible commute into New York City every day, and just every once in a while look up and go, oh God, Barbara, the idea of just a piece of meat, just a single piece of meat, a recognizable piece of meat, without a whole lot of weird little things on. So anyway, I grew up very interested by food, and I had an aunt who worked for William Morrow Book Publishing Company in New York, and she published a series of books about a little boy and a little girl in about 10 different countries. And they were fiction books. It was just somebody had written these things for children. And she gave me the French book, and the little boy and the little girl lived in Paris. And they were getting on the train in the Gare de Lyon when the book starts to go down and visit their grandparents who had a hotel in Nice. And, they described everything. The arrival in Nice, there was mimosa. I said, what is mimosa, Mom? And she said, well, it's kind of a feathery yellow. It won't grow in Connecticut. But then they described the celebratory meal in Nice. Les petits farcis, little stuffed vegetables, which are one of the great dishes in Nice. And that year, I think I was 8 maybe, for my birthday dinner, I asked for les petits farcis, and my mother said, I don't know, I don't think the A&P is going to do us any favors here. I think these probably only taste good with real baby vegetables and things that were grown in a nearby garden, not stuff that was schlepped across the United States from California to New England. I'll see what I can do. Again, cooking is an expression of love. I think that's the main reason that we cook, is to express love or express affection. And so she made these little things, but I was determined to get to the real ones eventually. And then fast forward, one day we were sitting there having lunch, and the phone rang, and I heard my mother saying, no idea. No, I didn't know. I am, yes. And then this went on for a while. And she came back into the kitchen. She went, I had a great Aunt Marie who lived in Lake Worth, Florida, who just dropped dead and left me $100,000. Which was a freaking fortune in those days. And I said, well, that's nice. And I said, you're going to tell Dad? And she said, I haven't decided. But, she said, one thing we're going to do, we're going to break all the rules. We're going to spend some of this money. And we're leaving for Europe on May 30th. And we will be back for Labor Day. And I don't care what your father says, we're doing this. My sister was too young to travel for that long, so she went to Brownie Camp. So my mom and my 2 brothers and I set off, and she themed the trip to the Roman Empire to keep us interested. So we landed in Rome, went to Pompeii, Florence, whatever. And my mother was an art historian who occasionally taught at Yale. So looking back on it, I could not possibly have had a better, and she was also beautiful and charming and spoke a lot of languages, and it was so funny for us to see all these Italian men. So at Mom, but Mom left. You see plumes of steam coming out of people's ears. But the thing about that trip, along with the art, of course, was the food. Italy. And then we were in Vienna, and the Wiener Schnitzel, and on it went. And finally we took a cruise up the Rhine. We took a train from Cologne to Paris, where we met and that was a great trip too, because when we stumbled into the compartment, there was a lady who had been riding that same train overnight from Bucharest, and this was back from the days of the Iron Curtain. And my mother looked at her and said, she tried speaking French, tried speaking a little bit of German, none of this worked. She spoke a little bit of Italian, and the woman seemed to understand, and then showed my mother her Romanian passport. And I went, oh, for heaven's sakes. And then when it was time, the lady from Romania took out her picnic and started cutting some sausage that was bleeding. And my mother, with a huge smile, said, take it and put it on your knee. Just put it on your knee. And finally, when my little brother woke up and saw this piece of bloody sausage on his knee, he went, Mom, what's that? And she said, put it in your mouth immediately, right now. And smiled at the Romanian lady. She said, sometimes you eat things because it's a survival skill, which is something I'll never forget. Anyway, from Cologne, Paris. And I
Fell in love.
still am.
Yeah.
We stayed in some flea bag hotel in the Rue Marignan. And that night, it was August. And I shared a room with my brother, the one next to me in age. And at about 11 o'clock, it's hotter than hell, and it was the room with a lot of mosquitoes. So I got up and started getting dressed. And my brother John said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm not staying in this sweltering room. This is my first night in Paris. I was 14. This is my first night in Paris. I'm going to go to a cafe on that big avenue up there, the Champs-Élysées." So he said, "Well, you can't go by yourself. What will you drink?" And I said, "I'll figure that out when I get there." So the waiter served us a liter of white wine. And people around us offered us gitan and Gaulois. And the same waiter eventually walked us back to the hotel because we were. But the hilarity on that cafe terrace, I thought, this is astonishing. I mean, the joy, the beautiful people, the fact that everybody's up late in the middle of the night, the glamour of this is astonishing. And the food, the first meal we ate in Paris was at the Androuet, which was a restaurant in the Rue d'Amsterdam. And Monsieur Androuet was the man who established cheese culture, modern contemporary cheese culture in France, because when the railroads were being built out, he was the first one to realize that you could start to ship cheeses from remote corners of France to Paris. Before, cheese was very regional. So Paris, for example, mostly ate Coulommiers and Brie and things that were produced around here. But Monsieur Androuet started bringing also Yeratif from the Basque Country and Roquefort and all sorts of things that were not previously available. And they had a restaurant in the Rue d'Amsterdam next to the cheese shop, which for us was paradise. And I'd never seen it. I mean, walking in there after coming from a country that had Monterey Jack, cheddar, Swiss, and what was the other?
Velveeta.
Velveeta, thank you, American cheese. American, exactly. And there was one good cheese in a little wooden box called Liederkranz, but that was not easy to find. But cheese was a generic product. It was not, and I was stupefied. I mean, we just looked at these things, and and the next night we went to a bistro, and the food in the bistro almost made me teary. I mean, it was so. I just thought to myself, how can you make something taste this good? This is amazing. And it was beef bourguignon. Mom made it at home and called it beef burgundy with Holland House cooking wine. And I said, Mom, and she said, don't finish your sentence, darling. Don't. And I said, but why? And she said, I told you, stop. But the city, I mean, looking in the windows of walking through the food markets and looking in the windows of bakeries and pastry shops and cheesemongers. We went to La Durée before it became an international brand name, when it was still just the only one was on the Rue Royale. And the waitresses were terribly, as my mother would describe them, snippy. And
Still are.
I know. Some things don't change. But again, I was overwhelmed with the elegance and the whole idea of buying pastries that were packed up inside of a pyramid with a golden ribbon. So how are you going to keep them on the farm after they've seen this? And I knew as the train was pulling out of Paris to go to England, the next stop on our trip, that I would do whatever I had to do to get back here. I didn't know how. And it took a long time because I finished college. I worked for at Random House. I worked for book publishing in New York. I worked for a couple magazines in New York. And then finally, my brother next to me was working in London as a lawyer, and I went to visit him. And I had studied in London for a year and a half. And he had a cocktail party, and I spent a lot of time talking to a very interesting man at the cocktail party, who said, "How long are you over for?" And I said, "I'm here for a week." And he said, sorry?
Louder.
I'm doing the best I can. I will. I'm trying. But I don't want to break. I can't. Can you have lunch before you go back? And I said, sure. And after they left, my brother said, "You know who that was? That's the editor of the Sunday Times." So I had lunch with the editor of the Sunday Times, and he offered me a job as a features editor on the Sunday magazine of the London Sunday Times. And the reason he did this is he said, "You know, Alec, he said, the Americans do a better job with Sunday magazines than we do. And you're exactly what I need, because you understand us. You have our dry sense of humor, but you have finely honed American editorial skills. So can you start work on, how quickly can you start?" And I said, "Well, Monday." So I moved to London and worked for a year and a half there. But the problem with that was that every once in a while I'd go into his office and I'd say, "Mr. Simpson, I don't have any working papers and I don't have a residence permit. And I am on the masthead of one of the most prestigious newspapers in England." So, sitting duck, right?
Yeah.
And he, "Oh, Alec, it takes too much time to do all that nonsense." And they're not looking for people like you anyway. And I thought, well, that's a really racist, horrible thing to say, but we're going to let that go for the time being.
It was basically true.
Well, it was then. This is
Right.
pre-9/11 and stuff.
Right.
But until the day that I came back from a vacation in Portugal in Gatwick at like midnight, and my 3 English friends went through the English Channel, and I went through the channel for people with horns and hooves. And, oh God, I'll never forget this as long as I live. This lady started matching the stamps in my passport to a calendar, and I'm watching this and thinking, what the hell? Oh my God. I'm gonna get nailed. And I said, "Madam, by all means continue. You'll see, however, that I've never overstayed my visa. I have been writing a novel about the pre-Raphaelite painters." And I have to regularly return to New York to do editorial consulting work there because I can't work in England, obviously. And when I said the pre-Raphaelite painters, she looks up and she goes, "Do you mean decorators?" And I said, "No, not like house painters, like artists." "Oh." And then she said, "Hold on." She went in the back, and I heard her telling my story to somebody else who looks at him. Doesn't look like he's going to anybody.
It doesn't look
Give him 3 months and tell him to get himself sorted out. Anyway, long story short, I had to go to New York to get an artist and writer's visa, where the evil British Consul General interviewed me for 4 hours. Me pretending that I was still living in New York City. And, meanwhile, people are giving birth in the waiting room, and I'm thinking, why are you doing this? And finally he said, I think everything will be fine. And he said, I wish you all the best in your new life in the UK. And I said, well, thanks so much. I'm flying back to London the next day. I'm crossing his vast office, as big as this room, and suddenly I thought, wait. And I turned back and I said, I'm sorry, how will this work? Will I get a stamp here before I leave, or? Yeah. No. Steepled fingers. No, Alexander. It will take from 6 to 9 months, during which time you would not be allowed to remain in the United Kingdom for more than a week out of any given month. But that won't pose a problem for you, will it?
Yeah. Oh, jeez.
Of course not. I'm walking down 3rd Avenue in a state of shock, and I ran into a friend, told her my tale of woe, and she said, "Do you speak French?" And I said, "Crap French, you know, like bad public high school 1-year college French." She called a company that was called Fairchild Publications, a fashion company that published W and Women's Wear Daily and all that stuff. She said, "Look, here's the thing. You can wait it out. Get a job in Paris, and then when your papers come through, if they'll hold your job for you in the UK, you can go back." So that was the plan. 40 years later, I'm telling you this story, and I never went back to England. I finally got what I wanted. I finally came here. And standing here talking to you today is a real pinch-me-tight moment, because I remember getting out of the train on that rainy night that I came to start my job in Paris for Fairchild Publications, and not knowing that Fairchild was such a fancy company. I stayed in a 1-star hotel near the Gare du Nord, and where there was a lot of happy things going on both sides of my room. Not in my room, but on both sides. And the next day when I got to the office in the Rue Cambon, the woman who ran the office said, "Alec, where are you staying? We should have booked you a hotel." And I said, "I'm staying in the Hôtel de la Mer up near the Gare du Nord." And she went, "Are you joking?" So all of a sudden I jump off a diving board into a very glamorous, high-paced life with a big fat expense account, which was like getting a PhD in Europe, because again, the theme recurs, the food. I did not know anything about fashion at all. And when I was interviewed by the late Mr. Fairchild in New York, I said to him, finally just blurted it out, I said, "You know, I don't feel that I can in all good conscience take this job without telling you that. I really don't." And he said, "You're a wonderful writer." And I said, "Thank you, Mr. Fairchild, but I really don't know anything about fashion." And he said, "Well, I could see that when you walked in." He said, and don't worry, Alexander, you'll learn, or I'll fire you. But I beat him to the punch. I quit. But I did get, slowly but surely, whenever there was anything to write about food, for W or any of the things that they published, I did. And I was continuing to write for magazines and newspapers in the UK. And then slowly but surely started doing freelance stuff on the weekends to prepare my escape. There was a wonderful magazine called European Travel and Life that Harriet and I both wrote for. I think it was one of the best travel magazines that was ever published in the US. And I got a lot of food assignments from the late great editor Judy Fayard, who some people might have known. Was an immensely talented lady from New Orleans who lived in Paris for 50 years. And finally I had to spread my wings and fly. And you know, by hook or by crook, I was barely making my rent once I went freelance. It was a real seat of the pants situation. But it worked, because one time when I went back to the US, my mother said, "Oh, by the way, this lady in New York would like to meet you. She's a friend of Mel Weinstein's, the daughter, her name is Ruth Reichel. I don't really know what it is, but she's something to do with food and stuff, but she would like to meet you. She's seen some things you." So I had lunch at the Four Seasons with Ruth Reichel, and where we ate whole frogs. That has never happened again. Not frog's legs, yes, but a whole partially developed tadpole? No, I do not recommend. But I was being interviewed basically, and I had to seem intrepid. Anyway, at the end of all that, she said, "I'd like you to be my European editor. Your job will be to write, first of all covering Paris and France, but also Spain, Italy. I speak Spanish, I speak Italian, I speak German. She said, Europe is your thing. I want you to find good writers. I want story ideas. I want talented photographers. And for 10 years, I worked like a dog. She's a very demanding, but brilliant and wonderful person. At the end of October, I'm doing a food tour with her in the south of France. We do one a year. This year we're doing Bordeaux and the Basque Country with Ruth and Nancy, a famous chef from LA. Thank you. Thank you. Where's that coffee? Nancy Silverton and Lori Osho, who's the food editor at the LA Times. And we have a fantastic time. It's a really huge amount of fun. So which brings us to today. Before we started today, I was talking to Harriet, and we were talking about where food writing and food criticism is, which I think is a really important subject before I dive into anything else about Paris. Because food writing, I mean, if you're going to do it the honest way, it's really expensive. When Ruth Rachel hired me, she said, you won't accept anything more than a glass of water from anybody who you interview. We pay for everything, Alec. We do this. The only way to do this is to pay for everything. And the New York Times has the money to do that. The Wall Street Journal sort of does. Nobody else does. None of the magazines do anymore. I don't honestly know how people build food careers anymore, because I was lucky enough to have a culinary education, a gastronomic education, that I don't think anybody will ever get ever again, unless you are filthy rich and you can just stuff yourself. But it wasn't even just that. It was the fact of doing it when you're on a mission. For example, when I went to interview Paul Bocuse, I was writing about that the other day. I write a lot for a fun little online magazine called Airmail that Graydon Carter started, and I wrote a story that'll be running on Saturday about meeting Paul Bocuse for the first time, and spending a whole day with him, walking around Lyon, talking about food, how he thought about food. I mean, the thing that he said, the best thing that he said was, he said, the best food smells like sex and tastes like sex. And just remember that, Alexander. I won't forget that, Mr.
He must be ancient, no?
Excuse me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, then he's even more than ancient.
But that was a whole. I mean, that was a whole other world then too. I mean, his career and the food that he served in his restaurant outside of Lyon is cooking that was pre-war cooking. Well, I feel lucky to have ever tried it, because they still cooked on a coal stove, and it's the food that you would probably eat if you could get inside of a Brassai or a Lobrano photograph. Mm-hmm. Because that food, I mean, their tastes, they're endangered tastes. Taste is not eternal, and our tastes change, and agriculture changes. And I feel ardent defender of French cooking, because I say, in a world which has suddenly gone flat, where every cuisine is now treated equally, that's a wonderful thing that we know all the different kitchens, and that we have the curiosity, and that every kitchen deserves respect. But I would, and if anybody disagrees with me, I would love to hear immediately from them. I would say, in terms of Western cooking, that French cooking is still the benchmark. It's still how to create and build flavor, basically from extracting juices out of meat, fish, and vegetables, and then building sauces from them. Building the sauces it's human genius. I mean, it's absolute genius. Did you have a doubt there, Adrian?
Do I have a doubt?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Please.
Well, I'm from New Orleans, and I don't think anything compares to eating in New Orleans. Even now, even after all the years I've been in France.
Well, the food of New Orleans is a child of the French kitchen.
Not just the French
No,
kitchen.
Spain and
Yeah, and
Native
the
American cooking.
no, the
African,
Italians. The
and
Italians
too.
were more my opinion. Italians were more influential on New Orleans cooking than any other ethnic group.
When the Sicilians came to build the lettuce, yeah.
The Sicilians built a lot of
Right,
things.
yeah, I know they did.
Uh,
But in any event, to go back to the idea of food writing today, you could say to me, well, why should I pay any attention to your opinion about a restaurant? And I'd say, as I was saying to Harriet, there's a difference. I mean, I think that the idea of critical thinking and criticism in general, whether it's music criticism, art criticism, gastronomic criticism, has been badly abraded by the internet because everyone feels that their voice is as valuable as anybody else's. And that's true up to a certain point in time. And yet for me, I'm fascinated by reading, for example, because theater tickets are so expensive that if I'm going to go see a play when I go to New York, I'm very interested to read a lot of different reviews. And I trust these people, and I've come to know their taste, and I know their expertise, and I know that they have an encyclopedic knowledge of the actors and actresses who are currently performing in America. In a similar vein, I've lived here for 40 years. I've spent hours in the kitchen. I love to cook. I don't think a food writer, I don't know any food writer worth his or her salt who doesn't like to cook. I just can't imagine how that could be. You know, I need, and I cook more now than ever before in the South. But I do believe that you can judge, you know, you can pass judgment on a dish. And I have the deepest respect for traditional French cooking. I think creativity is something that you earn and win. I think that food television has corrupted our idea as to what cooking actually is. Cooking is hard work. You know, I mean, if you're working, when I worked in hotel kitchens in New England during college summers and peeled, you know, 60 pounds potatoes, it's hard, heavy, repetitive work. And you're doing it in a hurry, and you're doing it, you know, and that's not even talking about actual cooking. I was doing scullery work. The moment of suddenly thinking, oh, I know, maybe a little bit of powdered clove would be good on these carrots, you earn that. Nobody's saying to you, I mean, you need to know, you have to build up to that place, from my point of view, before you earn the right to go freestyle. You can try to go freestyle if you want to, anybody can. But it won't have the same logic, and I don't think it will probably taste as good. And so I feel that we have to support the few publications that are still actually doing real food writing, like Savoir Magazine, or some of the newspapers like the New York Times or the Washington Post or San Francisco Chronicle that still have real restaurant critics and real serious food departments, because otherwise I think there's going to be a lot of backsliding. And I think that the people who came of age in my generation in America, which was discovering the wonderment of good food after the cheddar, Monterey Jack, Swiss era. And Ruth Reichel's like that. She's older than I am, but I think we grew up more or less at the same time and were amazed to really discover taste. You know, because if you look at the Fannie Farmer cookbook, American food was often thought of in terms of nutrition rather than pleasure. It's good for you, this is good for children, you know, the white meals in Boston, condiments, and I have too much respect for cooks, and I have too much respect for writers. I think food is one of the greatest subjects of all, to write about because it is history, it's geography, it's sociology, it's psychology, it's everything. I should have said that to my father when he asked me. I was a little dumbfounded on that beach in Florida. But I did say to him that day, I said, well, you know, restaurants are like theaters. I mean, if you go to a restaurant and you watch what's going on around you, it's a great pageant of life. You overhear snatches of conversations. You see at that table that people are on a first date. At the table next to them, people have just decided to get a divorce. Everything is going on in a restaurant. I mean, it's, for me, it's that public space, which is so prominent a part of Parisian life. My love for that is insatiable. And that spectacle, you know, the great spectacle of going to a restaurant, you know, watching the waiters, watching people have a good sharing, you know, sharing in the, becoming part of the din of a dining room. When you listen to the noise of a restaurant in Paris, you can tell by listening to the din, if you're not sure if it's a good restaurant, stand on the door and listen. You know, if people are happy, you'll hear it. And I think that all of this stuff is, you know, we're at a funny place now where I think we're between, especially post-COVID, I think we're between two different eras still. I think that the world changed a lot in COVID, was changed a lot by COVID. I think that where we are now, and I see this a lot with the new restaurant openings in Paris this fall, I think that happily there's a return to even, you know, much younger people, some you know, kids, somebody who could be my son, they love traditional French cooking, which just gladdens my heart to no end. They want to eat that food. They want to eat French food. They love sushi, but they also want their food. They want that. They want to perpetuate this. They value the heritage. They value the tradition of France. They value the gastronomic, you know, it's so deeply a part of French identity. And it's nice to think that this is continuing, but it's an ongoing battle because the food industry, the agro, or the, you know, whatever, what is it, agro-industrial complex, the fact that a cheese, for example, like Camembert, is under threat. There are only maybe 2 or 3 cheesemakers in Normandy who are still making traditional Camembert from raw milk, raw Norman milk, from cows that have been grazed in Norman fields. There's so many loopholes in European agriculture that it's heartbreaking. And that's what lobbyists do. Lobbyists, you know, are there drilling holes that you can kind of, and the 2 huge French dairy companies are not helping this either, because they bought up a lot of the, for example, with Camembert, they bought up a lot of those brand names, and they're counting on you not to read the small print. Food is hugely political. Every time I go to, you know, Carrefour or the market in Nîmes or wherever I'm shopping in Uzès, I read all the small print. I ask tons of questions, and there's a lot of information in any French market by law. I mean, the provenance of what you're buying is normally available and is spelled out. The stallholders, if they're honest, are mostly proud of what they're selling, and they'll answer your questions. We have to ask questions, and it's more important today than ever before to support people who are producing traditional, healthy, nutritious food and not, you know, Frankenstein foods. And we have to save Camembert, because without that, I mean, what's going to happen next? There'll be no more berets in France. I mean, it's hard to imagine what this country will become if that cheese doesn't work out. But here we are also now at the rentrée, we're back to school. And I was thinking about this with the nice lady in the train. She said, well, you're older than I am. How is Paris different then in terms of food than it is today? And I said, well, thank you. That's a very useful question. I will sharpen my knife on your shoulders. The whole food, the shape of the food culture has changed here. It used to be a pyramid, and at the top were it was Michelin dictated pyramid, the 3 stars, the 2 stars, which were often sort of bourgeois business tables. One star also. Then, brasseries, which were invented in Alsace as really tap houses next to breweries. Brasserie means brewery in French, as many of you know. And the Alsatians fleeing the Franco-Prussian War brought them to Paris, and they arrived in Paris at a good time because the growing city needed a restaurant idiom to feed large numbers of people in a hurry, affordable food. So the brasserie boomed, and it boomed again at the time of the 1900 exposition because they had millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people coming to Paris to feed. And then, Rock of Ages, what's more Parisian than the bistro? Foreign food when I got here was a little bit Asian, really seriously bad Chinese food. North African food, which I loved and didn't know until I moved to Paris. Very little Japanese food. A couple of Vietnamese restaurants, and then the one Spanish restaurant, or some very bad Italian restaurants.
Very few Italian restaurants.
There weren't a lot.
No, and they were all expensive.
They were expensive, and the pasta was so overcooked.
Right.
I mean, it was just. Now, Paris is almost, but not quite as international as London or New York or LA. We have an amazing assortment of. I mean, I think the French have become curious about the food of other countries. There's great Singaporean food here at the Hood. There are good Filipino restaurants. The foreign food is fantastic in Paris now. Bistros have reached a strange place where traditional bistros have become a luxury product. I don't know if anybody has read about it during the summer, but a very famous and wiltingly expensive bistro called L'Ami Louis,
Oh,
not
sure.
too far from here, was bought by LVMH, Louis Vuitton, Louis Elsie.
C'est dommage.
Which means that they'll probably be opening a L'Ami Louis in Las Vegas and in Dubai.
Right. With checkered cloths
Right.
and yeah.
The bona fide bistro really has become a real luxury. I mean, they're still here.
A
But
few.
you have their couple,
Yeah.
but that food is really tough to find. It's hard to find, and it's the food in my heart of hearts that I like best. I admire what happened here during the 80s when the young chefs created contemporary bistros, like Yves Cambibour and all of them. They're the ones who started contemporary bistro cooking, which was really important for French food. But
You would call that nouvelle cuisine?
Nouvelle cuisine
was before that.
Paul Bocuse and Michel
Yeah, right.
Bernard and all
Right.
of them.
Before that.
But they did a lot of those young chefs with what the French call bistronomie. They were inspired by nouvelle cuisine. Some of the ideas of nouvelle cuisine they brought into bistro cooking. That's kind of what French food media likes the best, that contemporary cooking. It's good. The brasseries are still, I think, kind of lost in space. Does anyone have a favorite brasserie that they can recommend, by the way?
I go to Café Charlot every day for lunch.
Do you? Okay.
At Café Charlot, yeah. Yeah, I mean, but do you call it a brasserie?
Balzar? I haven't been there in a long time. Okay, that's good. That's good to know. Okay.
Valois. Le Valois in your parking
Oh,
lot.
right. Oh, sure. Okay, that's right. That's
I don't know if you would consider that a brasserie.
Well, no.
I think it's sort of, yeah. But the brasseries went through a strange time when they were consolidated and bought up by two different food groups, and then that fell apart, and they were sort of lost in space. And now that many of them are part of a big food company called Bertrand, which has sort of improved the.
Well, now they're bouillon.
Well, bouillon are very, very popular again.
Yeah, because they're cheap.
They are cheap and they're sort of nutritious. A bouillon replaced the Alsatian brasserie in the Place de la République.
Uh-huh.
One thing
Chez
that has
Genie.
gone missing in Paris, something that was much more common when I first got here than it is today, was French regional cooking. I mean, there was a restaurant near the Arc de Triomphe that served the cooking of the north of France. There were 4 or 5 excellent Burgundian restaurants. There were lots of southwestern restaurants. There was a restaurant over in Saint-Germain-des-Prés that served the cooking of the Jura and the Franche-Comté. The food was absolutely delicious. There were more Basque restaurants. There were lots of Auvergnat restaurants because in the day, so many people from the Auvergne were cafe owners.
Still are, I think.
Still
I
are.
think they
Yeah,
still are,
I think
yeah.
I think that and that's a nice thing. I think that the grandfather came to Paris. The son didn't want to take over because he thought he should become a lawyer or something. And now his son thinks that the cafe is cool and wants to run it again. So they're being saved, which is great. Please.
Could you describe the food of the bistros that you love or that you loved? What the nature of that?
For me, anything that simmered for hours in sauce, like blanquette de veau, bleu bourguignon, all of those things. I mean, there was a wonderful bistro in Les Halles called Chez La Vieille, in the Rue de l'Arbre Sec, which was really hard to get into. And La Vieille, the old lady who ran it, Adrian Leeds,
Yeah, Adrian. I
she
see her there all the time.
cooked in a kitchen the size of that table, in a bathrobe and felt slippers, and she had like a couple of huge cooking pots on gas rings. And one time I said to her, "Could I come back and interview you about how you cook your food?" And she went, "Fuck off!" We're getting up to a good start. And she said, "What do you want to know? I cook." She said, "You build flavor." I said, "What's your name?" Alexandre. You build flavor. It takes a long time. That's why I smell of sweat. Can you smell my sweat? How do you answer that question? Oh, sort of. It's hard work. I mean, it's skimming a sauce. It's skimming a sauce. But those dishes, which originally were about building flavor from tough cuts of meat, often, you're slow braising the meat and you're creating a sauce and building the sauce. For me, that's the bedrock of Paris bistro cooking. And those are the things. I mean, whether it's adobe de boeuf, all of that. All those dishes are the things that I absolutely crave. And the books that Adrian mentioned earlier, there are 2 wonderful new cookbooks that came out this year. Niçoise, which is a book about cooking in Nice.
Rosa Jackson.
By the wonderful Rosa
She
Jackson.
spoke for me. She spoke recently at our Après Midi in Nice.
Oh, did she? Oh, great.
Yes, when she could no longer get into her studio because of the structural problem in the building.
Happily, that's been resolved.
Yes, I heard.
Yeah.
It's been resolved, yeah.
But as with Christmas coming, Niçoise is a lovely present for any friends who are cooks. It's a beautifully
beautiful
written
book.
cookbook. Rosa Jackson is a colleague of mine. We both worked for Time Out when Time Out still did English language publishing in Paris. And she's from Alberta in Canada. And I always, for Edmonton, I think she's from. And the first time that we ever met, I said to her, "Well, Rosa, why did you decide to leave Edmonton?" And she looked at me and she said,
Why are you asking that?
"I think that's probably the stupidest question." She said, "I like you, Alec." Are you kidding? Said I couldn't get out of there fast enough. But anyway, that cookbook is called Niçoise, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Photograph the recipes work, and it's just pure joy. And I wrote a huge thing about why we like the cooking of the south of France today for the Wall Street Journal, because there was another cookbook by an American woman who lives in Paris called Rebecca Pepler. And her book is called Le Sud, and she kind of mixes the whole south of France together.
It's very different. You can't mix the whole of the Sud together like.
It's more
You
of
can't.
and Rebecca is a very able writer and a good cook too. But that's more of an Emily in Paris type
Well,
book.
because Nice is very different than Provence.
No, of course.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Totally.
I mean, it's a beautiful book, and you know, but I think my story was, the article was about why is it that we are falling in love with the food of the south of France again today, and the answer is pretty easy, and I think that that food is healthy. There are a lot of vegetables in it. There's olive oil. It's seasonal. There's fish. It's very healthy food. And
Mediterranean diet.
sorry.
Mediterranean diet.
Exactly. So no mystery there, and I think that, you know, great priestesses of American contemporary modern American food, like Alice Waters, was blown away by the south of France, and I think that it's generational. I think that, you know, it's cyclical. People still come to Europe from the U.S. The difference between French and American food is much smaller than it once was, because I think we honestly eat incredibly well in most of the United States now. And it's not even just
in the bigger cities.
not even just because I had an apartment in Florida for a long time, and when I'd go into the public supermarket, I mean, they had 7 different kinds of kimchi in a public supermarket in Florida. And I thought, what, this is I was fascinated. I could spend hours in there. My French partner or spouse, Bruno, hates supermarkets, so I did not have the luxury of shelf reading.
No Whole Foods for you.
No Whole Foods. Well, he likes Whole Foods because it's fat. You know, come on out, come on out. You know? But I do think Americans have learned to enjoy food. I think that we've learned to appreciate seasonal produce more. I mean, you could say that if you have, you know, it's a function of income, of course. But if even in Walmart, there's a lot of organic produce today. So I think that, you know, how organic is it? I don't know. But I mean, the fact that it's even there, it's responding to demand. And I think that the Atlantic Ocean is not as wide as it was gastronomically when I first came to France, you know, when I was 14, or when I moved here in 1986. But I still think we eat a lot better in France than we do in the United States. Heresy, perhaps to some, but I think it's true. And I think maybe now that I've been such a windbag, you've come to understand that I am besotted by France, French food, French cooking, and the culinary history, the culture of chefs, everything about France. And it's just amazing that almost 40 years ago today, I got out of the train and checked into the Hotel de la Mer by the Gare du Nord. And 40 years later, here I am standing to you, blowing on as some sort of an expert about French cooking. But thank you so much for coming this afternoon. And it's a real pleasure.
You are going to take questions, aren't you?
Of course.
Oh, there you go.
Sir.
Imagine that 2 restaurants are opening a block away from each other. One is very traditional French cooking, and the other one is much more toward the bistronomy. It has more Michelin aspirations. When you go to review each of those, do you alter the style of your writing in describing their food to target whomever you think their audience will be?
That's an interesting question. No, I don't. I think that my writing style is very, my perspective on reviewing a restaurant, first of all, is that I'm on your side. I lived in a studio that was so small in Greenwich Village that I could lean out of bed and cook breakfast once. I remember what it was like to have absolutely no money whatsoever, and going to restaurants was a huge treat. So my point of view always is that I'm on this side of the consumer or the food lover. And I also think that, I think that good writing hopefully is good writing, whether it's a 3-star restaurant or it could even be, there's a new restaurant that just opened in the Gare de Lyon about, it's North African cooking. It's downstairs from the Train Bleu. And it's a welcome addition because you can dash to the station and have a shakshuka on your way to get your train, and that's a lot healthier than the other crap they were selling beforehand. And I would give as much respect to the cooking at that restaurant as I would to Guy Savoy or any of the famous chefs. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, do they do takeout for the trade?
They do.
Oh, good to know. I'm there. Oh, yeah, I'll be there Monday.
The offers
I
improved a lot.
love it.
Craig?
Along the spirit of that, of the people don't have a lot of budget, what do you think of the popularity of the bouillons in Paris right now?
I think it's brilliant. I think it's
bouillons.
Yeah,
Bouillon.
the bouillon.
Bouillon. Bouillon, the bouillon. By the way, Craig Carlson is another wonderful writer and food person in Paris. We're also both from Connecticut. Must have been something in the water, Craig.
He just wanted to eat pancakes.
Well, he's had a fascinating career. Tell everyone the name of your most recent book, Craig.
Let them eat pancakes.
There you
Yeah.
go. But no, to go, and it's a delightful book. The bouillon was that idea of feeding people again in a hurry. When cities were growing really quickly in Europe during the Industrial Revolution, a bowl of soup,
Yeah.
The whole idea, restaurant, the word, derives from the idea of restorative, restaurer, to restore your health. So the whole concept of the bouillon were the original restaurants, really, and that they started even predating right after the French Revolution with the first bouillon, and it was the idea of having a bowl of soup, and it was bouillon which you could add meat if you had more money, or vegetables or whatever. I think it's a wonderful full circle coming round, and I respect, there are a lot of them opening this fall too. Thierry Marx, who's I think a very interesting chef, because he grew up in Belleville, and as he said to me once when I interviewed him, he said, I was the only Polish Jewish kid in the neighborhood. It was a rough working class neighborhood. All my friends were North African or Asian. All we ate was potatoes. I didn't know anything about food. I never ate any French food until I went into the army. He said, but he's open. He has a great desire to make the pleasures of the table democratic or available to people at all levels of pocketbook. And he's just opened a bouillon in Saint-Ouen, I think. So yeah, there are a lot of bouillon are opening up, and I think they're fantastic. I think that I've often wondered and despaired of why the French have not coined restaurant idioms that can be replicated, so you can open not necessarily a chain, but something. Well, why not a chain actually? If it's good quality food, why not have 3 different types of bouillon? Seafood, vegetable, chicken, and beef, or something, and then the different garnishes. Could be, I think something like that could be really popular. So I think it's a really healthy. Positive thing both for French food, because the idea that there's so many hamburgers in Paris, and they were once welcome, but they're a little less welcome today maybe than they once were, because they do push other food out of the way. And but I think the bouillons are fantastic.
The younger generation, when you go go there? There's so many young people.
In the wheel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're cheap. You know,
Oh, yeah.
I think they're really good.
You had mentioned the New England idea of food as nutrition versus France food as pleasure. When I eat at a French restaurant, I'm always struck by how balanced the meal is. You'll have your protein, you'll have your carbohydrates, you'll have multiple vegetables. It almost seems like all the cooks have taken nutrition courses as a preliminary to being cooks and stuff. And can you comment on that in French?
Well, I think, you know, I mean, I think this leads us toward another stereotype about France, which is French women never get fat, which isn't true according to what I saw around me in the train today. And I should talk, but I think, you know, I think it's the whole idea of moderation and balance, and I think that, you know, there's another wonderful American food writer and chef in Paris, who just published a book called La Cuisine Bohème, Carrie Solomon, and she consults with the city of Paris to devise healthy menus for the canteens in the public schools, and they're introducing more and more vegetarian food and showing the children that you can have a meat-free meal that isn't, you know, sort of disappointing not to have meat or fish or whatever. And she's such a brilliant cook that this is a built-in part of the education here. I wish it was more national in France, but I think that French kids end up with a basic architecture of gastronomic and culinary knowledge that American kids just don't, because we don't privilege it. I mean, I remember, and I think that school cafeterias are a really important part of this process, because when I was in public elementary school in Connecticut, the women who cooked were either Italian American or Polish American, and they made everything from scratch. And the food was unbelievably delicious. I mean, stuffed cabbage and lasagna and spaghetti and meatballs, and I can remember running into one of these ladies years later in a store and rushing up to her and just saying, I just want to thank you, because, you know, I still think of that marinara sauce that you cooked. Huge vats of that you made. And she goes, oh my God, it's a holy honor to cook for you children. You know, culture, a culture decides what's important. And I think that happily here, food is still very important. It's still very much part of the warp and the woof of French identity. And I think that there is a growing knowledge, both for reasons of the environment and health and other things, to be eating less meat and to try to be eating, you know, in a way that's healthier and more diverse. And I think that is very much part of the French way.
Have you seen the school menus, Alec?
Incredible.
Sorry?
I said, have you seen the school menus? Because
They used to publish them in our local newspaper.
they're amazing.
Here.
Here.
Yes. Oh
Here.
God, yes. They're
Because
delicious.
30 years ago, when we put our daughter in school and I saw the school menu, they were having, you know, salmon with, you know,
Yeah,
Osé sauce. And it was like, really? It was amazing, yeah.
I do. I decided when we moved to this village, where I spend a lot of my time now, that I wanted to contribute something to the village. So when the mayor came and knocked on the door to welcome us to the village, I said, please come in and have a glass of wine.
Sorry about the street cleaners, I guess. Whoa. Going away, it's going away. Okay.
I said, you know, thank you so much for coming to welcome us to the village. And he said, we're really proud that you chose to come and live here. And I said, well, thank you. And I said, is there anything that I can do to contribute to the village? And he said, yes. I would like, could you come to the school once a week?
Once a
and
week?
do conversational English with the kids. Because otherwise the language instruction remains abstract. But a real live American in our midst.
So that's all he wanted was just your
Well,
English?
well, that's what he wanted the English. And but and after that conversation, I always stay and have lunch with the kids, and the food is absolutely delicious.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I mean, it's it's incredible, and we have such a good time because most of what's being cooked comes from within 5 miles of that kitchen. The food is absolutely delicious. So yeah,
They don't even realize the luck they have, those kids,
it's really good.
because it's for them it's norm, right?
Well, but then you look sometimes. I was reading in the newspaper about in some states in the United States they refused money from the federal government to keep the school lunch program running during the summer for people who didn't have enough money to.
Even in California.
Yeah, like.
What?
But we're not there, are we?
No, we're here on the road of Italia.
But you vote, right?
You bet.
Good. Please.
If I could vote
Oh, yeah.
five times, my vote is useless because, as everyone knows, you vote in your last place of American residence. So, I moved here from New York City a long time ago, but I still vote because I think it's important.
Vote for school board.
Sorry.
Vote for the school board.
I would. Maybe I should run for the school board. It's fun though to live in a village because it's been such a change. This will be the subject of my next book because having made my life in big cities, to suddenly be in the country, I had not lived with the seasons since I was a college student. I hadn't lived under starry skies since I was an adolescent. And to be in a village, you lose the anonymity of living in a big city. So that if I'm rushing to get to the post office before it closes at noon, and the postmistress always, bonjour, notre américain. I'm American. And then on the way back, and it never fails, the electrician and the plumber and the mason who did work on our house stick their legs out and say, Alec, you're sitting down, you're having a glass of wine with us. You're not in Paris. Sit your stand ass down. Take a breath. You're charging around here like a fireman. You're gonna have a goddamn heart attack. Sit down and have a glass of wine. And it's been well, exactly, but I mean it's I'm so astonished by how friendly. It's just completely different. It's an experience I'd never had before. Living in a village is psychologically and sociologically an entirely different experience than living in a city. And I'm learning. I feel that what my working title for my next book is My Second French Life, because I have a new take on everything. I fell in love with Paris years ago, but now that I'm spending so much time down there, I've fallen head over heels in love with France. And looking at France from that perspective and where I can get to easily from there changes everything too. And I don't go to restaurants as often as I used to, which is, I just love to cook. And to such a degree that our neighbor who lives behind us, every once in a while the doorbell will ring and she'll say, she lives alone, and she'll say, I should do this, but all afternoon I've been smelling that.
Can I come over?
Can I come over for dinner?
Well, plus you have the market. You go to the Uzès market.
The
And
market in Uzès.
Amazing.
Les Halles de Nîmes.
Oh, yeah.
But the freshness of the food down there is astonishing. And the biggest French Mediterranean fishing port is about 45 minutes from us.
Right.
So the fishmongers in Les Halles de Nîmes are incredible. And it's cheap.
Yeah.
Paris is really expensive.
By comparison, yeah.
I just wanted to tell more of a story. I ate at the restaurant in the Bourse recently, which promotes grains of all kinds of
Oh, right.
the restaurant. And I took photos of the two items that I chose to eat and sent them to a friend of mine, one of which was fried lettuce with grains and one was octopus with grains. And I was raving
that was very descriptive.
I just don't have enough arms. and she wrote back to me and she said, I don't know how anyone could rant and rave about eating grains with a few fish thrown in or lettuce. And I said, you had to be there.
I'll do it for you.
It was so amazing, the flavors just from those two simple things. It was just exquisite.
Yeah, we need to get that back on so we can hear you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
How long has it been on the table?
All the whole time.
I'll just hold it.
I-
Does that work better?
You want me to put it on? Oh, wait, Jack's going to do it. Thanks, Jack.
You're welcome.
This is our IT guy, Jack Clifford.
Any other questions?
Yes, can we buy your book?
Yes, absolutely.
Is he opening up so we can buy his book?
Thank you all.
Thank you, Alec.
Wonderful.
My son's married to his daughter.
Oh, is that right?
Everyone thank Alec Lobrano and get your books.
I'm the first to buy your book.
She's
I'll lead the way.